And basically at the sleepover, we started sharing our stories of sexual assault, and the same perpetrator who sexually assaulted me in 2011 sexually assaulted my friend in 2012. I just remember thinking like something needs to be done about this, and I could not sleep that night, and all I was thinking was if I had known that was sexual assault, then I would have reported it and then he wouldn't have done it to her.
Our guest today is a 23-year-old Australian woman who is pioneering a national movement about sexual consent that is stirring explosive discussions worldwide. She has been featured in The Guardian, Vogue, The New York Times, CNN and SBS, among others, and even nominated for Australian of the Year. Sick of constantly hearing about how many of her friends had been sexually assaulted, she decided to post an informal Instagram poll to her following while in lockdown in London during February this year. She asked, "Have you or has anyone close to you experienced sexual assault from someone who went to an all-boys school?" In less than 24 hours, 72% of respondents answered yes. The post went viral, and harrowing testimonies that exposed just how widespread rape culture is within our society started pouring in. She quickly launched teachersconsent.com alongside an online petition calling for earlier and more holistic sexual consent education to be taught in Australian schools. The petition is urging schools to engage in a sex education dialogue with students previously thought too young to be educated on issues such as toxic masculinity, rape culture, slut-shaming, victim blaming, sexual coercion, and enthusiastic consent. There are now over 40,000 signatures for the petition and more than 6,000 testimonies from current and former Australian school students who allege they were sexually assaulted, many by boys who attended Australia's most prestigious schools. Her campaign has not only forced people in power to take notice, but the New South Wales Police have also seen a 54% increase in sexual assault reporting between February and March this year. However, this is only the beginning. She won't stop until these calls for change are debated on the floor of Parliament. But more importantly, she is determined to continue advocating for change until sexual assault ceases to be a problem in our community. As a start, she is trying to ensure younger generations are better educated so that they never again have the delayed realization that they've been victims or perpetrators of sexual assault. She is an inspiring modern woman who is using her heroic voice to forge a once-in-a-generation curriculum review that will shape our culture for the better, and I could not be more honoured to have her on this episode, how we can all put an end to Australia's rape culture. Together we discuss how our rape culture began, the way in which we all perpetuate it, and examine the narrative shift that is required to put an end to it. It's my absolute pleasure to bring you today's guest, the trailblazing and revolutionary Chanel Contos. Chanel, welcome to Single at 30, the manual for the modern woman.
Hi Nicole, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
So you're currently in London, is that correct?
Yes, it's nice 10 a.m. in London right now.
So you're just waking
Sunny.
up. Thank you so much for taking part in this episode. I just think what you're doing is unbelievable. And I just think it's crazy that you're 23 and heading this movement, which has gone viral across the world. Talk to me about it. How did you get started? Tell me about your personal and professional backgrounds and how that's influenced you in this movement.
Yeah, so my personal background is growing up in Sydney's eastern suburbs, which was where the petition started. And I went to a school called Kambala, which is a very, I guess, it's a very elite school only in the sense of wealth, not in the sense of the type of people who go there.
Fellow Kambala girl. So I graduated in 2006 and you graduated in
2015.
Okay, right. All right. That makes me feel old.
Yeah, Kambala is a great school, and it is just one of those like elite institutions in Australia. And my petition started out of that because when I went to Kambala, I received consent education in year 10, but the only reason that happened to me was because Kambala could afford the resources to bring in external people to teach that to me. It wasn't in the curriculum at the time. And I guess my journey in terms of being an advocate for consent education started the first time I learned what consent was, because the first thing I did when I got told what sexual assault was and what consent was, because for me that was also the same moment I realized that I had been sexually assaulted 2 years prior. Me and my two best friends went to an authority at the school's office and said that was amazing, but that needed to happen earlier. And we basically got told that we were advanced for the year, and that's why that sort of thing happened to us.
Wow.
And that it wasn't fair to put other girls in the year who, may not even know what sex is 2 years prior in an environment where they're having conversations like that. And I just remember being so angry and, but anyway, and then didn't think about it again for years and years and years. And then last year in 2020, I was at a sleepover with 3 friends, and we also, they went to neighbouring all-girls schools in Sydney's eastern suburbs. So again, the same sort of like elite institution vibe. And we grew up together, knowing each other, going to the same parties, socialising together. But we weren't as like that close, but in our adult life we've gotten very close. And basically at the sleepover, we started sharing our stories of sexual assault, and 2 things happened. One, we realized we had endless of them, of our friends, both perpetrators and victims that we knew, that we socialized with personally, that, things that happened at parties we were at and didn't realize. And 2, I got told that the same perpetrator who sexually assaulted me in 2011 sexually assaulted my friend in 2012. And I just remember thinking like something needs to be done about this, and I could not sleep that night. And all I was thinking was, if I had known that was sexual assault, then I would have reported it, and then he wouldn't have done it to her. And I think it's just so telling of the way, rape culture in our society is so cyclical, and that like every little block or two, it actually does stop the cycle, whether that be education, reporting, anything. And then again, fast forward about a year. So that's when I had the idea to do this, to collect testimonies that were specific enough that pinpointed the school that the person went to, but not specific enough to pinpoint the actual person. Basically just bring light to this rape culture that was just rife through Australian schools. This year in London, and with one of my best friends, we grew up together in Sydney. They're sitting on my floor talking, they've just started going to therapy and was getting flashbacks to things that happened to them when they were young. And one of those things was their sexual assault experience that I actually personally witnessed and stopped. And we were talking about it, and we're just sitting there like both crying and shaking because, I used to get really triggered when I spoke about sexual assault. And we were just, the only question we could think of was, do they know they did this to us? We're here, almost 10 years later with trauma symptoms, and are they even aware that they are sexual assault perpetrators because they weren't taught what sexual assault was? And then that's why I start my Instagram poll, which tried to point out the difference between how many people who grew up in Sydney that were girls felt like they had been sexually assaulted, and how many boys that grew up in Sydney felt that their friends had sexually assaulted someone.
Yeah.
And obviously there was a massive discrepancy in that. And then from there, this just all took off. And then I guess my professional story, and I think it's important to the context, is I'm currently a master's student in gender education and international development. So I'm constantly reading like all this stuff that I advocate for, and all the things that I say we need to do. I'm not just making them up. I'm using like best practice and like many, many, many hours of reading.
Yeah, wow, what an amazing journey. I was just reflecting as you were speaking, because obviously I went to the same school, Kambala, and I have zero recollection of ever learning about consent. And I read when I was reading all these articles about you that you said, teaching kids about consent at 16 is too late when they've already been sexually active for, a number of years. So it's just wild to me that that was the response that you received when you raised it with the school. What has the school's response been since you've started this petition?
They have been very, very accommodating to me, especially me personally, in terms of giving me like moral support. They've helped me by getting, they were like, what can we do? Like, do you want lawyers? Do you want a PR firm? And I was like, no, I need therapy and I need an EA.
Yeah.
In terms of what's going to be done at Kambala that's different in consent education, I don't know if anything's changed in the last 2 months, but I'm okay with that. I met with 9 eastern suburb schools, principals of eastern suburb schools around Sydney, which were the main ones that kept coming up in my testimonies, just because that's who I initially called on. When I met with these 9 principals, and they kept just being like, what can we do? I was like, just chill, like don't just implement something right now.
Yeah.
We we need long-term, consistent
Yeah.
educational reform here. I think that Kamala is open to educational reform and consent. I think that I think they would struggle with the media if they weren't.
It's
And
wild to
I think they
me.
are just genuinely shocked.
Yeah, it's wild to me because I read that you said that the word consent does not appear in the curriculum at all across
It's not in
Australia.
Australia. It's
Right.
not in the Australian curriculum, which means it's up to the discrepancy of states how to teach it. And then it also means it's kind of optional, like the same way that, no one would ever skip over Pythagoras' theorem in the curriculum. That could easily
Right.
happen with consent.
Okay.
But that's what Victoria's done differently this time, mandated consent education. So they have that in the curriculum, they have the resources there, but it's never been compulsory, whereas now it's compulsory.
Right. Okay. Well, that's a step in the right direction at least.
It is. Victoria's doing really well in being like really progressive about this. I've been meeting with the Department of Education, the Minister's office quite regularly, and they're doing big things, but
Yeah.
the other states and territories aren't yet.
Have you been met with any resistance? Because I read a few articles where some of the schools are not being encouraging towards students in terms of giving testimonies about their own experiences.
Yeah, so this was an interesting one, and I think it did happen at the beginning. I think that I think the schools did think that this was just some like big fad website that was going to be up for 48 hours and then go away, and their
Right.
advice to students basically do not participate.
Right.
And to be honest, I also thought it was going to be a big fad website that was up for 48 hours and go away, so fair enough. But what they didn't realize there was by telling their students not to participate was the worst thing they could have done, because it was victim blaming, because it wasn't, obviously boys' schools can't tell
Yeah.
their students not to be named, but they were equating being on the website and saying that you're a victim of sexual assault with a bad reputation of the school.
Exactly, like bad PR.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't even think they realize how ingrained these notions of victim blaming are in them after hearing this petition, hearing all these things, talking about how we live in a victim blaming society, and then them going ahead and saying to their young girls, do not identify yourself as a victim. That is so bad for the school. It's like, no, being a perpetrator, bad for the school.
Exactly. So how do you define victim blaming?
I guess victim blaming can be as extreme as, someone literally saying that you coming forward with your sexual assault experience and someone telling you that that was your fault because of something you did. And it can be as minor as continuously putting the onus on victims to make sure they don't get sexually assaulted, instead of making the narrative about making sure that people don't sexually assault people. We're told what to wear all the time. We're told, again, that being sexually assaulted is associated with a bad reputation. We're told, like, every inch of a girl's existence, the way she's socialized from such a young age teaches her how to not get sexually assaulted, which means when she does, it makes it so hard to speak up against. And then if she speaks up against it, it means that she's very rarely believed.
Exactly. Yeah, like questions like, were you drinking? Did you go back to his house? Why were you alone with him? Like that somehow.
Exactly.
Like,
When it should be, why was he so drunk? Did he take you back to his house? Why did he take you alone with him when
why can't he be alone
with
with you and control himself? More importantly,
Yeah.
I mean, why does it matter
like,
where you are? He shouldn't be assaulting you.
Yeah.
Full stop.
Literally, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So talk to me about your intention with teachusconsent.com and the petition.
So with teachusconsent.com, my first and foremost aim is to implement more holistic and earlier consent education Australia-wide. When I say more holistic, I mean we can't just teach what consent is. We can't just teach what sexual assault is in, legal definition terms. We need to teach about the real life scenarios that eventuate, which is, a boyfriend pushing a girl's head down on him. We need to teach about the power imbalances that come into play. That's essentially it. The power imbalances that come into play when trying to navigate consent, because we haven't taught girls how to say no in society.
Absolutely not.
And these are the sort of things we need to like nut out, and we need to talk about, making sure that there's an empathy gap between the way that boys and girls are socialized. That just means that girls are constantly overstepping their boundaries at the expense of their own comfort, and that boys are willing to request those boundaries be overstepped at the benefit of their own sexual desires. And that's why we have this epidemic of sexual assault amongst youth. So when I say holistic consent education, I mean just explaining, gendered norms, the fact that if you are sexually assaulted, every inch of society will be against you, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't speak up. Someone said to me, I haven't actually fact checked this, but the person who said it to me was pretty legit. He was this man working out of the US who's helped me on something, and he's a really, really influential man, and he's like dedicating his like side hustle life now to preventing sexual assault because his daughter was sexually assaulted.
Oh, wow.
And like this guy's like top dog, like he name dropped Jeff Bezos, and I was like, okay. And he said to me, if I had known when I was growing up my children that my daughter was more likely to get sexually assaulted than she was to smoke in this day and age, I would have taught my son things very differently and taught my daughter things very differently.
Wow.
But it just needs to become a thing that we just acknowledge that this is a very real problem, and it is a campaign that is in our lives as much as telling children not to smoke is these days.
This behavior has become so normalized, like it just goes back to what you're saying. There is no education regarding this serious cultural issue that's taking place, right?
Yeah, I was at an all-girls boarding school in the UK a few weeks ago, and I got in the room with all these girls, and I just had to start the consent talk, and it was kind of like my first consent talk, and I was like, all right, girls, it's pretty common to go to a party and, either you or your friend or someone at the party goes to a room, gives a guy a head, and then, they come out 10 minutes later and it's like, off you go, and then he may or may not talk to her at school the next week, right? And everyone was just like, yeah. And then I was like, okay, let's imagine going to a party. You all talk before about who you want to eat you out that night, and then you go to the party, grab a few guys each, beg them to go down on you. They give you head for about 10 minutes, and then you just leave the room, go tell your friends about it, and then ignore them at school the next week. And they all burst out laughing. And I was just like, that's the power imbalance we're dealing with right now. The fact that you think the first is normal and that the second is incomprehensible.
Yeah.
The audacity and entitlement of those young boys to expect the first to be normal is the exact power imbalance we're dealing with right now. Our legal system needs to account for the fact that the most common type of rapist is someone who is your friend, who is your boyfriend, who is someone you trust, and who's a young person. Most of these types of rapists, they're called entitled opportunists, and most of them perpetrate for the first time when they're in their teens.
Yeah. I saw you posted on your Instagram the different type of rapists. Let's go through those, because I feel like in the movies and the media, it's always this sort of serial rapist that's violent and can't control himself. But the one that's most prevalent in our society is that entitled rapist, which I know I've had my own experience with a number of those. So what sort of characteristics do they have?
So an entitled opportunist is used to instant gratification and satisfaction. Because of the way our society socializes men, they are almost always cis males. Because toxic masculinity is the norm, these people are usually very assertive, opportunistic, go after what they want, which our society values in men, which usually means they end up in positions of power later in life. Entitled opportunists are not inherently bad people. They're not the type of rapists that maliciously plan to, kidnap someone and keep them in their basement for weeks. They're usually not very violent at all, whereas other types of rapists are really violent. Entitled opportunists often use sexual coercion, manipulation, social pressures, guilt tripping, saying things like, if you're going out with a boy who's 2 years older than you and he wants to have sex with you and you don't want to, and he says, you're clearly not mature enough to do this with me, you mustn't love me if you don't want to do this with me. People don't realize that that's sexual assault, the perpetrator nor the victim. An entitled opportunist is very, very possibly perceived a nice person in all other aspects of life, but there's a fundamental empathy gap there, and ultimately in that sexual moment, usually his sexual desires are more important to him than, potentially the unconscious girl in front of him, or the girl in front of him who's very hesitant and passive to the situation, which is a trauma response. And then that's why we have this magnitude of sexual assault, because the entitled opportunist does this thing to a girl who doesn't scream and kick saying no, but also doesn't say, yes, please do this to me. And then he goes outside of the party, probably gets a high five from his friends.
He's celebrated, right? These types of characters are celebrated.
Our society doesn't only let them go unpunished, but most and they probably don't know they've done it until this conversation. Like, I honestly think there are thousands of boys around Australia right now being like, shit.
Yeah.
And 3, they literally get celebrated. Like, in this rape culture, they get celebrated for it. It is more socially acceptable for a young man to sexually assault someone than it is for a young woman to engage in consensual sex.
Right?
And I think that just
Yes.
defines like, that's a big statement, and a lot of people hear that and be like, oh my god, you're being ridiculous. But if you think about it, as you said, they get celebrated and girls get shamed.
It's our reality. That's the problem, you know? So what do we do about it? What are you doing about it?
The point of the petition and campaign is not to point fingers. The point is to let everyone know that it is guaranteed that someone you know has been sexually assaulted, and guaranteed that someone you know has sexually assaulted someone.
I found the testimonies super confronting, but at the same time, I wasn't surprised or shocked whatsoever. I've heard those stories a million times over. I've experienced them myself. And if I felt for you having to deal with that, because there's no way you could have ever thought that it would blow up to this extent, that so many women would reach out to you. And even men, when you ran one of the polls, I think over 50% of men said that they knew a fellow man who had committed sexual assaults. I mean, the response has been huge, right? But I think what was most concerning for me is that it wasn't just, you know, one-on-one incidents. More often than not, there are a number of people privy to these incidents, and nobody did anything about it. And that's why I totally agree with you when you say we're living in a rape culture. I mean, how would you define this rape culture?
A rape culture is when societal norms about and attitudes about sexuality and gender make it so rape can not only occur but flourish and go unnoticed. And that is these things like victim blaming. And the way that relates to attitudes about sexuality and gender, that goes to things like, you know, shaming girls who participate in consensual sex more than boys who sexually assault, and, you know, the big taboo around female sexuality. And that does talk to gender norms and expectations, constantly putting the onus on girls to make sure that what they're doing in their day-to-day lives doesn't get them sexually assaulted. It encompasses the fact that, you know, we say boys will be boys. I can't even articulate the double standard, because it's like we give boys like so much, you know, they're in all ways superior to us, except whenever they do something that's wrong, then suddenly say boys will be boys, girls are just so much better at doing it than boys. And I'm just like, what? Like, and I'm not saying that girls are better than boys. I'm just saying, can we give boys some credit if we're going to give them credit for everything else in their life? Like, why don't we also give them some credit for the bad actions? Like,
they're so capable in every other aspect, but when it comes to women, we treat them almost like dogs. Like, oh, you know, like they're just boys. Excuse that, you know?
They suddenly become like, you know, we talk about this like sex drive and like biology and the fact that they just like need to do that in that situation. And it's like, there's a lot of things that humans needed to do 2,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago. We don't need to do anymore because we have evolved and developed morals and socialized. And that's
I challenge that. I would say that women have just as high a sex drive as men, except they can control themselves, you know?
Well, that's what I mean. Right? We've learned to control ourselves, whereas society just continuously excuses boys to not control themselves.
Yeah, exactly. But like you said, like, women's sexuality is so taboo.
For young girls, that message is so problematic. A young girl is curious about her sexuality the same way a young man is curious about his sexuality. And then also, if we continuously tell girls, we omit the fact that sex is meant to be a good thing, it's meant to feel nice when it's something that you want to be doing and when you're ready for it, how are they meant to tell between a consensual and a non-consensual situation?
Right. And so how do you tell? I mean, that you've mentioned enthusiastic consent before. What does that look like? I mean, I hate to kill the romance, you know, in a sexual scenario.
I think in Sweden, enthusiastic consent encompasses verbal consent, you know. But I also don't, like, honestly, is there anything much more romantic than someone being like, please do this to me? Like,
right.
If you find that romantic, there's some problems with you.
Yeah.
Enthusiastic consent can be physical cues as well. But I do think that there should be a verbal element included for legislation. I'm not sure. I haven't thought about that completely, especially if it's like the first time you're sleeping with someone or something like that. But enthusiastic consent and like what a consensual experience looks like is, you know, as I said, it's not just freezing in that moment, a girl just being still while a boy does something. because that's a trauma response, and she doesn't say no, but she's not accepting that either.
Yeah.
And that's also really weird when you think about it, that people would want to, like, that we perceive sex in a way that is something that may be desirable to a person, to just like have someone be frozen in front of them. And it just shows how much, when people are young, they're doing this to tick a box and tell their friends
It's
rather
the
than for their own
challenge,
safety.
right? Like I read you say, like they get the frigid girl in the bedroom and it's a conquest. Like they've achieved something, right? I mean, when I think about it, enthusiastic consent's very clear. Like you said, the girl's telling you she wants it. But the problem, I think, with the culture that we're currently living in is guys think that no means yes. And it's kind of like a game for them to get you to change your mind in the bedroom.
And I've heard this from a few of my guy friends. They've said that they've gone home with a girl, and the girl in the cab on the way home has been like, I'm not having sex with you tonight, by the way. And then the boys been like, okay. And they've gone into their room, kissed for a bit, not made any further advances. And then after a few hours, been like, okay, I'm going to go home now. And then the girl was like, either said to them directly or said to their friends behind their back, like, what the fuck? He didn't even try to do anything with me. And it is really problematic that society tells girls to play hard to get when they don't want to be. Like, they want to, then like girls should just be able to engage in sex if that's what they want to do without shame. But because of this, like, protect yourself from sex, because of this whole slut shaming, because of the whole way, again, that girls think that if they just, like, if a girl is liberated in her sexuality, she is frowned upon and less desired. It all contributes to this rape culture, because suddenly boys think it's normal to chase after a girl a few times until she feels well, fine, so she doesn't get called a slut for it, even if it was her intention in the first place. And then that means when it's not someone's intention, they do the same thing. And I think that, like, the concept of like playing hard to get, and I also get this with my friends as well so much, when they're like, should I text this boy, like, even if it's off Hinge or something? I'm like, yes, fuck that. Why is our society telling us that, like, boys should text us first? It contributes to rape culture. Like,
where they've got the power and they
yeah,
they drive the situation and make the rules. Yeah, totally.
exactly. If they want something, it shouldn't be too keen to express our interest in something. We're literally, like, again, just downplaying enthusiastic consent, saying that it's like not socially acceptable.
Women should be submissive and wait for the guy to take action. And if they do take action, then they're like slut shamed for it. And that's how we sort of perpetuate this like situation as well. Because I definitely do think that women also play a role in it for sure.
100%. I think a big.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I completely agree that we need to be educated more on this. So talk to me about Operation Vest.
Operation Vest is a campaign that called for, like, a mass influx of informal reports of sexual assault. And in doing this, you could remain anonymous or not. And you can give as much or little detail about the perpetrator as you wish. And then the ultimate idea was, for one, to show to the New South Wales Police how few sexual assaults are reported. Two, to reduce victim blaming in our society, because what can happen is if you submit a SARA, you can do it from the comfort of your own home. As I said, it can be anonymous. You can name the perpetrator. It doesn't mean anything. That perpetrator, that cannot hold them accountable anyway, because obviously it's an anonymous report. So
Yeah.
if someone ever comes into the police station and makes a report about that person, even the validation that that victim can get by a police officer turning to them and saying, this person has been reported before, they're a repeat offender, we really encourage you to take this seriously. Or even maybe the shift in the own police officer's mindset by seeing that this person has done this sort of thing before. I think that's a really big step in reducing victim blaming and encouraging reporting. And then the last thing, and again, I think this is really important, it normalizes reporting sexual assault, because you don't need to make the big scary step from, waking up in the morning after being sexually assaulted and walking straight into the police station and then, going to hospital and getting a rape kit done. You can wake up, you can process, you don't have to do it then, you can do it later, your friend can do it for you. And the purpose is to put in as much information as you can remember at the time. And there's a history backlog of your own testimony. So then in future, if you ever want to call it up again, it's there. And then it gets rid of this, this bullshit stuff like, why are you only bringing this up now that he's a famous and influential person? And it's like, oh, because I was sick of him using his position of power to continuously exploit people. But it brings up, like, it gets rid of all this victim blaming, because it shows the historical backlog of it. it shows, you can put more details in it. And then it also provides police intelligence. It's going to be a big wake-up call for police to see how many, probably like underage girls are submitting these stories.
Yeah. It's interesting because in my own experience, a guy that I grew up with sexually assaulted me. It didn't even occur to me at the time to make a record of it. And one of the reasons I never spoke about it was because I was scared that, I would be ostracized by the people around me and also attacked for, essentially getting myself in that situation. And I just feel like that is going to make such a difference, in boys' behaviour, knowing that that's a possibility that somebody can make a record about them, but also for women, knowing that they can do this anonymously and then just sort of forget about it. Because the thing is, a lot of these cases are happening to teenagers who don't have the emotional maturity or life experience to truly comprehend what's taken place, and to out somebody in their community, people they go to school with, is just far too daunting for them to take on at that point in their life. So I really commend you for creating this, because I feel like it's going to be a game changer. I certainly would have loved to have had that growing up. So
in New South Wales, the system existed, but it just wasn't used
really,
in this way.
Was it called the same thing, Operation Vest?
It was called a SARO, but then we labelled it Operation Vest.
Right, okay.
In that way. But in Victoria, it doesn't exist at all, so I'm calling for it to exist in Victoria. But in New South Wales, it was used just for the historical backlog, whereas now it's like the cross-checking of perpetrators, and it also means you put your data, so you can report anonymously, but you can also put your details down. And then, say I go into the police station and report a sexual assault and it's against the same person that you have a SARO Operation Vest against, and you've left the details and been like, if anyone ever reports this boy, let me know.
Yeah.
They will call you and say, there's someone else who's reporting this person. We encourage you to take yours more seriously. And then, we can either go in together, we can be connected, we can provide support to each other. Or I think the way our justice system works, it's irrelevant if someone has, it's not like we would together be able to charge him, but, set up two different cases and, again, just reduce that victim blaming and feeling like you're not alone.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just thinking of what you were saying before about how we were discussing how men are sort of celebrated for their behaviour, and then women, if they were to ever engage in the same behaviour, would be criticised for it. And that same person who sexually assaulted me, I remember years later, like over 5 years later, contacted me over LinkedIn, and he said, I really respect you for not giving in that night. Most women would have. And I feel like that just perfectly illustrates exactly what's going on in our society.
It is so fucking sadistic.
Right? And he actually even wrote that. He put that in writing on LinkedIn, and it's exactly what the issue is, for him to think that had I given in, that somehow would have been a poor reflection. And he's the exact entitled opportunist that we're talking about, who's now some top Australian lawyer who essentially tried to rape me, but because I fought back, he couldn't seal the deal. I guess he's assuming that most women wouldn't have fought back. And, you've mentioned fawning, which I actually had never heard about before until I followed your Instagram stories and what you're doing with this petition. It's crazy that isn't even really recognised by our justice system as like a sort of coping mechanism for women in these situations.
Fawning is a very female trauma response.
Yeah.
It's very, very common in females and not so common in males, because fawning is a trauma response that most often kicks in when you're frightened for your life, you're scared, the same as any other trauma responses. But it's also when the person who's attacking you is usually like physically imposing to you, so that it's not really an option to fight back, which is why it's so often for this situation to happen between a girl and a boy, because physically and generally boys are larger than girls.
Yeah.
So, we all know about fight and flight, and, freeze is also a trauma response that's been spoken about more in recent years. We all know about them. We all know that's what people do when they're scared. What we do not talk about is the fourth trauma response, which is called to fawn. And in this situation, it's pretty new, and it's like there's lots of literature emerging out of it from the Weinstein cases, because there's so many questions as to, why did you go for lunch with him later? Why were you nice to him? Like, why did you keep working for him? Whatever. Again, just victim blaming. What, in that moment, as a survival technique, you're nice to the person who's threatening you. You see it over and over again, the testimonies, people saying, I do what I needed to do to get out of there. So you're scared, so you either passively lay there while they have sex with you, you smile at them after, and you're nicer than the next day. You like laugh and like be like, no, no, it's fine, and like you're shy. So many girls said like, they were trying to have sex with me, so I just gave them head to get out of the situation, to make them happy. So many girls keep saying the words just to make them happy. That, without them realizing, is fawning. And the problem is we don't, one, teach what that is, because that means that perpetrators don't know that a girl being, again, like a girl just being passive and silent and submissive isn't yes. That needs to be like, yes, I actually actively want to do this with you. And then two, it contributes to victim blaming, because girls don't understand that that was their response to these situations. And it is very rare that your response was to kick and fight. And I'm so glad that that worked out for you. But the reality is, in a lot of these situations, kicking and fighting can get you in even more trouble than you were in before, which is why so many people fawn, because it is a very effective trauma response, because it gets you out of the situation, get out alive, and that's the goal. There's also all these elements that come into play that, like, people who are more likely to fawn are also usually more likely to have like abusive relationships in their life, where they like are used to like walking on eggshells around people. As I said, it's effective, and then it means that afterwards you sit there and you think, was that rape? Because I didn't say no, and like, oh, it's not his fault because he definitely didn't know, because he didn't say, I didn't say no, and I still continued to go out with him for another month after, or I still went on another date with him, or like I still spoke to him, like all these things. And it's like, yeah, but what he did to you was put you in a room and lock the door behind you. And in that moment, you did what you needed to do to get out of the situation. And you made him feel as though you wanted to be there to get out of the situation. And that response and, fawning mixed with an entitled opportunist, which makes up the vast majority of sexual assault cases, neither of those things stand up in court.
Yeah. Well, I'd be lying if I didn't say that he didn't get violent in response. Like I definitely had bruises all over me. And I would also be lying if I didn't say that I fawned to an extent, in the sense that after it took place, I did appease him because he drove me home and I had to be pleasant, and I just basically shut down so that I could get home in one piece. And then I would see him socially, and I would try to not engage with him, but I certainly wasn't, calling him out on his behavior. I didn't really do anything proactive about it, so I totally relate to women who have been sexually abused and still interact with that person, because it's a power play. It's the society that we live in. If somebody has social influence, you are at a loss, because what can you do other than, sort of out the situation, which is very confronting for the victim. I didn't want people to know about what I went through, because I somehow felt like I was at fault. I was so young, And that's the problem with this lack of education. You don't even know that you've been assaulted. You just feel like you got yourself in a situation that you shouldn't have been in. So you're somehow, to blame for that.
What an injustice of our society that people get sexually assaulted so often that they often don't even know it's happened to them.
Right?
Or that they've committed it. And that's an injustice of our society and our education system together.
But also, I watch so many documentaries on this topic. It's something I'm very passionate about, and that's why I was so excited to speak to you today, because there are so many rape victims, and then they do report it and they receive backlash. They're slut-shamed, victim-blamed, and the emphasis is on how outing that situation could potentially destroy the guy's academic or professional career. And they receive such a backlash that they're cyberbullied. They often have to move states. A lot of them commit suicide because they're A, not believed, and B, not supported on a public level or a legal level. I know that there was that really famous case with Brock Turner, and it was all because he was an athlete at Stanford and you're ruining his career. And it's like, he literally raped a girl, and it's just... There's so many injustices on an educational level, on a cultural level, So I think that Operation Vest is going to, you said it's been around for a long time, but airing it and letting women know that this is an option for them to report, because these cases are so underreported, right?
They're so underreported. And also, if it just becomes like, the point of Operation Vest was to make it normal to make a sorry complaint. And if it's just like, you know, your friend, even if like I'm thinking, God, how good would it be? I'm just thinking of my like 15-year-old self to be in, you know, in the lunch courtyard and be empowered with these like understanding and language and tools and know what Operation Best is and things like that. And for my friend to come in from school and be like, oh, like my boyfriend did this to me last night. And imagine if instead of just being like, oh, what a dick, I could be like, oh my God, you should fill out this report. Do you want me to
Yeah.
help you?
Right? Like, no,
Imagine the change in,
it
you know,
empowers
language. It's
you.
so empowering. It's so
Yeah.
empowering. And even the word fawn, the amount of girls who messaged me after I talked about what fawning was to be like, holy shit, I've only ever blamed myself for this. Like, thank you.
Yeah.
Um,
And it's such a female response as well because we're told to be pleasant, you know, to be quiet, to be polite. Like it's an obvious reaction for us to just shut down, appease a person, exit, you know, do what you have to do, compromise on some level to get yourself out of that situation and then tolerate them moving forward because we're not supposed to be outspoken. We're not supposed to make a fuss of the situation.
exactly. Yeah. And it's just so ridiculous that our society still sees it as making a fuss.
Right?
Like, and it is because we have this stereotype of what a rapist is, and that these people don't fit that stereotype. So people refuse to believe it. Someone said to me, this lady who works in, she's kind of a first responder to sexual assault victims at Royal Prince Alfred. She was like, the people that we believed that they were raped are the ones who are dead. And
I
like, I
read
think
that. I was
so,
so shocked. Like, that's what it
it's
takes,
so
right?
true.
For the person to be
It's so
dead.
true. They
Like,
need to be like either left for dead in a bush or missing or something, and then suddenly the whole society is like, oh my God, that poor thing.
yeah. And I can speak to that from my own experience. When I tell people about my experience, it's either met with laughter or silence. Like, they don't take it seriously. You were talking about girls who like preface on the date that they're not going to sleep with the guy. I'm always that girl. Like, I always preface, like, happy to hang out with you, but I'm not going home with you. I'm not sleeping with you. Even after the first kiss, and it could be in a public scenario, I find more cases than not, guys are very quick to become sexually aggressive with me, whether it's through biting, pulling my hair, choking, and this is in public situations. And I just wonder, what is the influence, do you think, porn and alcohol has on this rape culture that we're currently living in? Because I can't say that porn is solely responsible for this, but I feel like it's definitely contributing to the situation, because where else are they learning these behaviors? And why do women think it's okay
So
that it's happening?
I think the thing is, so there's two problems there. There's porn at a young age. One sets unrealistic expectations. It's currently being used as the only form of sexual education for Australian youth. And, you know, there's so many reasons that's problematic. But what you're talking about here is older boys who obviously do know what sex is and like have an
Yeah.
understanding of it. They become desensitized to just healthy intimacy and romance and
Well, it's not intimacy, it's objectification and it's a power play.
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
they are dominating you, right? I mean, there
yeah.
is no intimacy. It's
It's
I want you
completely
to
gone.
serve me and I want to dominate you. Not all the time, but a lot of
Yeah,
the time.
I think it's really common for videos to like so many porn videos are just so degrading to women, even the ones that don't fall in the category of, you know, domination and stuff like that. They're just still so frequently, you know, they don't talk about consent. They don't I think I guess the false expectations that Australian youth have from porn, I guess men are having. I don't know. I do know it does play a big part, but I don't know how to fix it.
Yeah. Well, I think you're on the path to fixing it. Like, you're focusing on the education aspect by introducing holistic sex education in schools. I think that that's definitely going to help resolve an aspect of the issue. But I wonder, how did this even begin? And I mean, like, is this human nature? Is this ingrained in us? You've made a lot of references to the patriarchy. What do you think is causing
Right.
this?
You know, since agriculture, it's just been a slow form of control over the female body, and the same way that humans had property for the first time in terms of land, and they had money for the first time, and services, and all these concepts of things that you know, our market system has created in the last however many years. Women became commodities.
Yeah.
Women became property.
But like, the objectification of women is one of the biggest industries in the world, right? Like, it's
Yeah.
particularly in the
Well,
Western world. And then you have the sex slave industry. I mean, it's just, It's everywhere.
It's everywhere. And the answer is how to take that down. God knows, when it has now shaped our whole society. And, we have these historical gender norms that were unnaturally imposed on us, and we created civilization. And then now we have this like internet where there's just like unlimited access to objectification of women. And not even unlimited access, just like so normalized to us.
Yeah, that's it.
We don't even know we're accessing it when we're scrolling through Instagram. It doesn't even need to be pornography. Like Instagram, TikTok, the way we look at a photo of our friends and judge what they're wearing, or, how they're spoken about, things like that. It's just, the whole internet is built around the porn industry, and our whole society, as a consequence, reflects these ideals that just do not promote, as you said, any form of intimacy.
Right. And also women are like subjecting them to those ideals, in the sense like you go on Instagram and women are naked in a lot of their photos, like objectifying themselves.
If a girl who's 14 years old does post a photo in a bikini, why do we sexualize that? She's potentially just going for a swim and like wants to post a photo of her activities, but we sexualize everything, including underage girls' bodies.
Yeah.
Like the whole school children like porn genre, the whole like how frequent it is to get catcalled and sexually harassed when you're in school uniform. It honestly sickens me when you think about it.
Yeah.
And when you're 15, you're like, oh, that like 25-year-old boy thinks I'm really cute. That's so cool. It's like, no, that's really super problematic.
Yeah.
It's illegal. Just like, it's illegal. And it's just down to the question, why are we sexualizing these young girls who are just trying? It's so ironic to me. All they're trying to do is go to their place of education to learn, and they can't even walk 100 meters without getting beeped at down the street by some like creepy 35-year-old guy.
Right. Who thinks that it's normal to do that.
Well.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it is. I used to get catcalled more often when I was in school uniform than any other time.
Okay, so that's concerning. That is concerning. Yeah.
And I think that, again, when I was speaking to these girls at a UK boarding school the other day, there's this patch of like open road for about 100 meters where they have to get from like the school to like the whatever pitch, like the, I don't know, hockey pitch, whatever. And like I spoke to about 8 different groups, and every single one of them was just like, we cannot walk through that strip without being like sexually harassed or catcalled, blah blah blah. And we're told to make sure our skirts are down, and we're not allowed to wear shorts, and we have to walk between places wearing.
The onus is on us to try to avoid getting catcalled instead of men being taught not to behave that way. So let's talk about bargaining with the patriarchy.
Bargaining with the patriarchy is a concept that explains how when a woman has the ability to exert power over another woman, she often does, because that's her only way of getting power. And it's for short-term gain and long-term loss. Because in the short term, you maybe say something mean about a girl and you feel good about yourself, and the boy next to you is saying that, yeah, you're way cooler than her, or yeah, she's such a slut and you're not like that. Or, you also, that can even come down to being like, oh my God, she's got so much plastic surgery. It's like, she's getting plastic surgery because she's trying to compete in this world where nothing is good enough. Like, let her be.
Yeah.
Like all of these things, we're constantly diminishing women as women. And I also hate so much when people are like, girls are so bitchy. I'm like, we're not bitchy, we're bargaining with the patriarchy. Like, we're not, and we've all done it. It's undeniable to say we haven't done it.
That is something I really hate about being a woman, because I feel like we are so much more powerful when we work together as opposed to against each other. But we're brought up not to behave that way, essentially. Even as an example, like a guy will cheat on his girlfriend and the girl will get angry at the girl that he cheated on her with, as opposed to addressing the issue with the guy, right? That's happening as a teenager, let alone later in life.
We're just constantly pitted against each other.
Yeah.
And it is like exertion of power. And that's what I mean when it's for long-term loss, because ultimately, every time you diminish another woman's achievements, every time you talk down another woman, you're contributing to your own oppression long-term, even if that like satisfaction gets you. And that's when you say, women work better when we're all together and empowering each other. That's because we're actually, getting somewhere if we do that. But it's hard to do. I mean, we've been socialized in that way. We've been told we're bitchy. We've been told we're meant to be competitive. We've been conditioned. We've been told that, all of these things, all of these stereotypes, it's automatic in us to think them.
Yeah.
I think as women, and as you said, women have such a large role to play in this situation as well. We don't realize that we are also internally misogynistic.
Yeah, absolutely.
We don't realize.
We call girls sluts all the time and, objectify women all the time. Like, look what she's wearing. She's such a slut. Her boobs are fake. Slept with him on the first day. Like, we do it all the time. We are perpetuating this vicious cycle, you know, and that is conditioning. That is us competing for men's attention. We also get ourselves in, you know, questionable sexual situations because we think that that's what we have to do to get men's attention. Like, it's everywhere, right? Education plays a huge role in this. Absolutely.
And calling ourselves up, it's education, but it's also reflection, because it's going to take a while to shift this.
Yeah.
So ingrained in us.
Yeah.
I read this in Florence Given's book about like internalized misogyny, but like the fact that it's surprising, and this was such a thing to me because I like definitely do this, that like split moment of like surprise when you find out that someone who's like super gorgeous is also really smart or something like that.
Yes, I've
like,
read that, and I do it all the time.
Yeah, I'm like, how is Nicole so beautiful inside and out and also super intelligent? That, you know, goes against my stereotypes of what a girl should be. So why is that shocking to me? And, you know, we need to acknowledge that we do have that split second moment of awe, and we need to realize that that is a wrong thing to have, and that we can only get rid of that if we acknowledge we have it. There's no point being like, I treat all girls the same. I love all girls. I would never objectify a woman. You know, that goes for both boys and girls. We need to admit that, of course, we have these stereotypes because that's what our whole society has made us have.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
that it's okay to acknowledge that if we can move forward and just be like, there is absolutely no reason why Nicole can't be drop dead gorgeous and as intelligent as she is. Society's just told me that it can be one or the other.
Right. And I read you say like this, we have such a challenge ahead of us because it's not only educating younger generations, it's also educating a generation who has adopted these patriarchal ideals, and they're the ones who have to create this change or orchestrate this change. So it's on both ends, right? But I'm curious, because you've mentioned you've lived in 3 countries and you think that this issue is majorly prevalent in Australia and private schools. Why do you think it's more of an issue here?
So Sweden is obviously Sweden. We love Sweden.
We love Sweden.
And, you know, Sweden's one of the most gender equal countries in the world, which I think is why the rape culture wasn't prominent there. And, you know, you go out, I remember so clearly, I went out clubbing my first night in Sweden, came home with my exchange friends who were from like a variety of countries around Europe, mainly UK and Sweden, and the Netherlands, which is also super progressive. And I remember being like, no one grabbed my ass tonight. And everyone's like, what the fuck? Like, why would someone grab your ass? And I was like, no one grabbed my ass tonight. Like, I was probably about 19. It was the first time I had ever like been at a party or a club or anything with boys and girls where someone did not grab my ass. They were all just like, what are you talking about? And, you know, when I started thinking about it, when I was in Sweden, I was studying international development, and, you know, obviously gender equality comes into play a lot with that. And on the back of every bathroom stall in the clubs, it's like, have you like sexual assault hotlines, reminders of what sexual assault is, reminder all around the clubs, reminders about sexual harassment. And it's just like, I didn't even notice, but that would make such a difference. And it just is in the culture. Like, I was speaking to my Swedish friend and he was just like, I just cannot comprehend why you think someone would possibly grab your ass. And I was just like, I can't comprehend that you can't comprehend that.
To us, it's like offensive if you go out and like somebody doesn't try. It's like, what's wrong with me? But no, that's actually not okay behavior. So it goes back to conditioning, right? Like, they've been conditioned how to behave like gentlemen and we haven't, right?
Not even gentlemen, just respectable human beings. Like, honestly,
common decency.
Imagine the audacity to like walk past someone
and grope a woman. A man or a woman.
Like,
so in terms of the testimonies, are there any that stand out to you in particular that illustrate, you know, this rape culture that we're currently living in?
I think this is a really good one. This is from Askham 2013. It says, I was at a gathering when I was taken into a room by a boy who I was tuning at the time. He then proceeded to have sex with me whilst I said no and stop over and over again. He didn't listen and continued to have sex with me. I didn't tell anyone it was unconsensual, and continued to be abused by him on multiple occasions as I was in denial and didn't want to feel like a victim. And I think that is so encompassing because we have so many things here. We've got, you know, a gathering, that's a small social group of close and trusted friends. We've got someone you're tuning, someone you are personally interested and romantically involved in, but that doesn't mean that you're willing to have sex with them. We've got, you know, this is a rare situation where the victim, you know, was saying no over and, well, not a rare, but she didn't fawn. She was actively saying no and no over and over again. She continued to be abused by him. That's her fawning. That's her sticking in an abusive relationship. And she was in denial. because she wasn't equipped with the tools to know what sexual assault was. And she didn't tell anyone because of the way that our society treats its victims.
She probably felt shame and like that she wouldn't be supportive if she spoke out, which is a common
Of course, she wouldn't.
response. Yeah, exactly.
I honestly couldn't even like comprehend how I would react if one of my friends at the time that it happened called the thing that happened to them sexual assault. Like I really don't know how I would have reacted. I assume I would have been in denial as well. It's such a hard thing for young girls to have to navigate.
I think it's mostly fear. Like if you're in a trusted environment with your peers, like people you've grown up with, claiming that somebody from that group has sexually assaulted you, like it's not going to be received well. I just know that if that was to happen to me today, right now, it still wouldn't be received well. Even though I'm in my 30s and I'm educated on the topic, it's just the reality.
You don't want the responsibility to be on you. Like,
yeah.
So there was actually another time which I guess I'm still processing in a way because it was so recent, but this guy who I'd been flirting with for ages like came back to my house, and I was very clear I didn't want to have sex with him, and was, you know, like I also, like I remember saying, like, you know, you cannot touch me like below the waist, like that was the rule I imposed the night. And anyway, we went to bed, and then I woke up and he was like touching me and fingering me basically. And you know, I woke up and I was super turned on because someone was touching and fingering me, and I was like suddenly really into it, and then I was like getting with him really intensely. And then I literally, like, thank God I had some moment of clarity, because I was like, you know, had been drinking that night as well. And I was just like, in my mind, I was like, what the fuck, Chanel, you were asleep 10 seconds ago. Do not do this. Like, you will regret it. He asked me on a date the next day, and I said yes. And then 3 days later, I called him and was just like, hi, that was actually really not okay. But like the processing it took, and that is me knowing all the things I know,
Right?
you know, being so active in this space, being such an advocate for something like that. It took me 3 days to be able to comprehend, understand, and speak about it to anyone. Like I remember being on the phone to my friends, being like, I don't know, it was really weird. Like maybe I was just like, I was asleep, so I can't really remember. And I'm just doubting myself over and over again. And it's like, this is even me in my 20s, you know, 22 at the time, still not fully empowered and still with not enough trust in my society to be able to just openly say that happened. I can't even imagine like the situations that young girls, like as I said, you know, that's me, and it took me days to process, to say something to him, and I was terrified to do it and things like that.
I often think that because even in my own personal experiences, you know, for instance, the guy who I grew up with who sexually assaulted me, yes, I fought back in that instance. And I'm like a very direct person. I often wonder, what do women who aren't direct, how do they internalize that situation? How do they deal with it? How do they get out of that? And as such a direct person, I've even found myself in numerous situations just like yours where I've been passed out and then the guy has tried to sleep with me, and I've woken up in a situation where the guy's basically sleeping with me. And it's like, and I freeze, and it takes me ages to process it, and I'm like, that's not normal behavior. And the guy continues to pursue you. You indulge it by flirting, texting back, and then you take a break from the situation. You're like, actually, he's a creep. That's creepy behavior. You don't behave like that. Like, that shouldn't be normal.
No. It shows that, one, there's no understanding of what sexual assault is because if
Yeah.
someone's unconscious, they can't defend you. And it shows, two, how sex is perceived as just like you are going to give me gratification no matter what state you're in. Like, why? I could not think of anything worse than having sex with someone who is unconscious. Like, I actually could not think of anything worse. People who do it, mainly boys, they just, again, care about their sex drive. For me,
Right.
having sex with someone is about making sure that they're happy and comfortable in the situation.
Yeah.
And
it's a reciprocal exchange. Like, you know?
that's what consent is. It's not just saying yes, it's wanting it, it's reciprocal, it's paying attention to the other person's emotions and feelings. And in that moment, you should be, you know, instead of it being normal to gain pleasure over like dominating someone, it should be normal to gain pleasure over making them feel good in that moment.
Exactly.
And it's rare. I feel like whenever I'm in a sexual experience and the guy like cares about me or like, you know,
it freaks me out. I'm like, what?
Yeah, I'm like, don't get angry. I'm sorry.
So what has been the reaction from your friends and families and guys you've dated before and guys you've had these incidents with?
So pretty much everyone that I've ever had any sexual encounter with down to a handy has texted me. Except the boy who sexually assaulted me. And well, there's actually I guess 2 boys who sexually assaulted me, and as I said, the other one texted me, and I have fully forgiven him, and like it doesn't, like I have closure from that because of the way he acted in that moment, and because I understand that he's not a bad person, and I don't think he'll ever do it again now that.
And it was unconscious. It's part of his programming too.
He's just a product of his society, and I happen to be the victim of the product.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've had like lots of nice support, except from the boy I'm talking about. That I was 13 when it happened, obviously.
That's very young, Chanel. Like,
I honestly think if I knew what sexual assault was, I would have been able to get out of the situation. I had friends who were literally meters away from me at the time. So like, I think if I knew what it was and like knew to say the word help or like something like that, I did say the word no. Like I was saying no, and it was forceful, but it wasn't like, again, I think if I knew what was going on, I would have felt justified to be angrier.
and what advice would you have for individuals who have engaged in sexual assault and now being confronted with their behaviour and realising that they've done something wrong?
I think that if you come to the realization that you've sexually assaulted someone, you have to think about the situation really carefully. One, again, acknowledgement and reflection is the most important thing you can do. Speaking, like telling people close to you who you trust, telling your closest guy friends that that's something you've done is really important, because they've probably done it too. And then they get a chance to reflect, and it becomes normalized to acknowledge that this stuff happens.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean we can excuse it, but it means we can just be like, that was super messed up. We're not going to do that again. I guess if you can acknowledge that you've done something like that, all you can do is just make sure you don't do it ever again.
Exactly, right?
As you said, like we've spoken a lot about this episode, that girls can contribute to this so much, but every single person needs to reflect and change things, because our norm has resulted in this, and that's not good enough. So we need a new norm. This just needs to happen at all angles, and education is the best way to create cultural change in a community. We also need policy reform. We need legislative reform. We need a reallocation of resources. We need a cultural shift. It all needs to be done at once.
Yeah.
For maximum effect, and it needs to be done consistently.
Our justice system needs to mirror what's going on an educational level as well, right?
It needs to be ready for it. In the UK, after the Me Too movement, the absolute number of cases that were convicted went down, even though the rates of reporting skyrocketed, because the justice system could not handle it, because it is not equipped. It has no idea how normal this crime is. Like if suddenly everyone reported, the whole system would literally collapse, and you wouldn't be able to get a court date for 5 years, and they would only put through the really horrible, clear-cut cases. They wouldn't put through the entitled opportunist cases. They would only put through the like sadistic rapist ones, where it was like obvious who was going to get convicted. It would overflood our jail systems. Like Australia is not ready for this. Girls are angry. Girls are being loud. Like if we all reported at once, the whole country would just combust. So they're going to have to do something about it.
So do you think that we can break this cycle for future generations?
I do. I think it's going to take time, but I think it is an intergenerational thing. Think about how far, like, homophobia, for example, how much more prevalent that was a generation ago, and how much a generation can change. I even think that just like any girl growing up in Australia right now, engaging in this conversation, knowing what it's like for them, knowing the reality, the way that they grow up, their sons and daughters will be different, and that's important. But I think that once we get to a point in society where it's suddenly more normal to call out behavior that is rape culture than it is to engage in it, there'll be a snowball effect and a tremendous shift. Foundations that uphold rape culture will fall fast.
Yeah. I'm curious to see how many cases are reported because of what you're doing. It will be interesting to see the change that takes place over the next few months. So how can we each contribute to fixing this situation, men and women included?
Just reflection, like girls, boys, everyone, what behavior you've let your peers get away with, what behavior you've engaged in yourself, parents, the story, like what you've put onto your kids. Like, I don't think parents realize that the way they comment on the media, the way they comment, I don't think many parents would say, I would blame my daughter if she got sexually assaulted. And that's why they don't understand victim blaming. They're like, obviously, if my daughter told me this, I would never get angry at her. But it's like, you don't understand that all the things you say before she gets sexually assaulted is what matters. And it's not about how you act when she tells you. It's the fact that she's too scared to tell you because of the things you say.
It's so intricate how much change is required to really make a difference. I read this quote where you said, we can't change what happened to past generations, but we can make a difference for younger generations. And I'm just so grateful that you're trying to do that. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I've enjoyed every minute of talking to you, and I just can't wait to see what you do next. Thank you so much for listening to this Single at 30 episode, How We Can All Put an End to Australia's Rape Culture, with the trailblazing Chanel Contos. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review and hit follow and subscribe. I've included a link to Chanel's teachersconsent.com website in the show notes. If you're located in New South Wales and have been the victim of sexual assault and want to report your complaint to the police, I've also included a link to fill out a SARO for Operation Vest. If you have a question that you want answered, DM me on Instagram at single_at_30 or join the Single at 30 closed Facebook group to become part of the community where together with other like-minded modern women, we publicly air the uncomfortable and the unspoken. As always, no topic is taboo as we search for answers to the questions most people are too ashamed to ask. This is Single at 30, the manual for the modern woman that we are writing together.